Throughout history, the human story has been punctuated by the rise and fall of empires, and at the heart of these empires often stand the figures we call tyrants. They loom large in our collective memory, these men and women who wielded power with an iron fist, who commanded armies and reshaped the very maps we know. But what happens when the music stops, when the curtain falls on these larger-than-life figures? How do tyrants face their end? Is it a whimper or a bang? Today we're going to look into the abyss of power and witness the dramatic demises of some of history's most infamous rulers. Perhaps the most visceral end for a tyrant comes at the hands of an assassin. The sudden thrust of a blade, the piercing report of a gunshot, these are the sounds of regime change. Take, for instance, Gaius Julius Caesar, master of Rome, conqueror of Gaul, a man who straddled the world like a colossus, and yet on the Ides of March in 44 BC he found himself surrounded by the daggers of his own senators. 23 times they stabbed him, each wound a testament to the fear and resentment Caesar had sown. Add,
"Et tu, brute?"
The words echo through the ages, a final, poignant whisper of betrayal. Francisco Solano Lopez, self-styled Napoleon of South America, dragged his nation into a ruinous war against Brazil, Argentina, and Uruguay. Surrounded by his enemies, Lopez refused to yield. S1, as Francisco Solano Lopez, I die with my homeland. If the assassin's blade represents a swift end, then the fury of the mob is a slow burn, erupting after years of anger. Few events embody this better than the French Revolution. In 1789, the Bastille falls, and with it, the old order of France begins to crumble. King Louis XVI, once the embodiment of absolute monarchy, finds himself a prisoner of his own people. The cries of liberté, égalité, fraternité ring through the streets of Paris. On that cold January day in 1793, Louis, stripped of his titles, is led to the guillotine. The blade falls, severing more than just a head, it severs an entire way of life. Fast forward to the dying days of the Cold War. In Romania, Nicolae Ceausescu, the communist dictator, ruled with an iron fist for over 2 decades. His regime finally unraveled in December 1989. On Christmas Day, Ceausescu and his wife, Elena, were captured, subjected to a hasty trial and executed by firing squad. The images broadcast around the world served as a stark reminder that even the most entrenched dictatorships are not immune to the wrath of the people. Not all tyrants meet their end in a blaze of violence. Some are claimed by a far more implacable foe, death itself. Napoleon Bonaparte, the diminutive Corsican who crowned himself Emperor of France, ultimately surrendered to an enemy he could not outmaneuver. Exiled to the remote island of St. Helena, his dreams of empire dashed, Napoleon spent his final years in enforced idleness. It was there in 1821 that stomach cancer finally claimed him. Even the emperor, it seemed, was mortal. Joseph Stalin, the man of steel who transformed the Soviet Union into a superpower through a reign of terror, met a similarly undramatic end. In March 1953, after a night of drinking with his inner circle, Stalin suffered a massive stroke. He lay paralyzed in his private quarters, his inner circle hesitant to act. By the time Stalin finally received medical attention, it was too late. For some tyrants, the weight of their crimes becomes too much to bear. Faced with the consequences of their actions, they choose the coward's way out, suicide. In the spring of 1945, with the Red Army closing in on Berlin, Adolf Hitler retreated to his underground bunker.
As the bombs fell and the city burned above, I, holed up with my mistress, Eva Braun, and my closest cronies, planned my final act. On April 30th, 1945, Hitler shot himself, his dreams of a 1,000-year Reich going up in flames. Centuries earlier, another emperor, faced with the prospect of his own downfall, chose a similar path. Nero, the 5th Roman emperor, was a man of contradictions. When his excesses and paranoia finally led to a revolt, Nero, declared a public enemy by the Senate, fled Rome and died by his own hand.
For some rulers, the battlefield is where they made their name and where they met their end. Richard III, the last Plantagenet King of England, was no stranger to violence. Crowned with a reputation for ruthlessness, his reign was marked by intrigue and murder. In 1485, at the Battle of Bosworth Field, Richard, betrayed by one of his own bannermen, found himself surrounded. "A horse, my kingdom for a horse," his desperate cry echoed across the battlefield. But it was to no avail. Richard died, sword in hand, marking the end of an era. Maximilien Robespierre, architect of the Reign of Terror during the French Revolution, also met a violent end. On July 27, 1794, denounced by his former allies, Robespierre was arrested. The following day, he too faced the guillotine. Throughout history, the victors have written the history books, and they've often been the ones to decide the fate of their vanquished foes. Saddam Hussein, the brutal dictator of Iraq, learned this lesson the hard way. For decades, he ruled his country with an iron fist, responsible for countless atrocities. In 2003, the United States invaded Iraq, toppling Hussein's regime. The dictator himself went into hiding, only to be captured months later. Put on trial for crimes against humanity, Hussein was reduced to a defendant in a courtroom. Found guilty, he was hanged in December 2006. Benito Mussolini, Il Duce, the swaggering dictator who brought fascism to Italy, met a similarly ignominious end. In 1945, with the Allies closing in, Mussolini attempted to flee to Switzerland, disguised as a German soldier. He was captured by Italian partisans, and on April 28, 1945, he and his mistress, Clara Petacci, were executed by firing squad. Some deaths, even those of the most powerful, remain shrouded in mystery.
Alexander the Great, conqueror of Persia, pharaoh of Egypt, king of Macedon, died at the tragically young age of 32. It happened in Babylon in June 323 BC. The cause? History tells us it was a fever, but the specifics are murky. Was it malaria? Typhoid? Some historians, pointing to the lavish banquets I enjoyed in my final days, whisper of poisoning. Did a jealous rival, a disgruntled general, finally decide to act? We may never know for sure. Alexander's death, like so much of his life, is shrouded in legend. What we do know is that his empire, vast and sprawling, did not long survive him. And then there's Grigory Rasputin, the mad monk of Russia, a man whose life and death were as bizarre as the times he lived in. A mystic who held sway over the Tsarina Alexandra, Rasputin seemed to possess an almost supernatural hold over the Romanov family. His influence, coupled with his debauched lifestyle, made him a target. In December 1916, a group of conspirators decided to act. Lured to a basement, Rasputin was plied with poisoned cakes and wine, but to no effect. He was then shot multiple times, finally collapsing.
The deaths of tyrants, as varied and dramatic as the lives they led, offer a glimpse into the heart of power, its allure and its perils. Some met their end swiftly, cut down in a moment of violence, while others lingered, their final days consumed by illness, regret, or the fear of the inevitable. While some tyrants managed to escape the vengeance of their enemies, others became symbols of rebellion, their deaths marking turning points in history. The French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, the fall of the Third Reich, these seismic events all hinged, in part, on the demise of a tyrant. Their stories share common threads: the intoxicating nature of power, the corrosive effects of corruption, and the ever-present possibility of a fall from grace. And they serve as a stark reminder, not just of the fragility of power, but also of the enduring human desire for freedom and justice.